guys. It's a little early, isn't it? Well, it is, at least when we're filming this. Welcome to our third episode in our little student ministry video series, Out of the Oven. On our last video, if you guys remember, we had a nice loaf of Micah as we looked at how Jesus has always been God's plan for our redemption. Today, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. Shepherds. All this and more on Out of the Oven. Guys, so today I have a new apron, one given to me by my dear old grandmom, or grandma as I always call her, because we're going to do a little bit of baking, and I have a nice pie to come out of the oven. Alright, and today we have a Zechariah pie. And we're going to be eating Zechariah pie today because Zechariah prophesied at a time we might find ourselves a little bit familiar with. The people of Judah had been taken into captivity by the Babylonians, and for 70 years they weren't allowed to go home. It wasn't until the Persians came in and took over the Babylonians that the people of Judah were allowed to go back home. So as they went back home and they started to establish some new routines, they left their quarantine of 70 years. It's a long time. Zechariah gave them some prophecies to just remember, hey, as you guys are going back home, let's remember that, when you're reestablishing routines, that God has already been at work doing something and we need to be joining him in that. And that work simply has just been restoration. That you and I as God's people have been broken off and separate from God because of our sin, and God has always been at work about mending that relationship. And so Zechariah uses the analogy of a shepherd in the back half of his book, and we're going to look at that today to see what does that tell us about who Jesus is. So go to the book of Matthew and then flip back a couple pages to Zechariah, and we're going to read out of 3 places, and just stick with me. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 16 says this, "On that day the Lord their God will save them, as the flock of his people. For like the jewels of a crown they shall shine on his land." And skipping down a couple verses to chapter 10, verse 2. "For the household gods utter nonsense, and the diviners see lies. They tell false dreams and give empty consolation. Therefore the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. My anger is hot against the shepherds, and I will punish the leaders, for the Lord of hosts cares for his flock, the house of Judah, and will make them like his majestic steed in battle." And skipping down a little bit more to verses 8 and 9. "I will whistle for them and gather them in, for I have redeemed them, and they shall be as many as they were before. Though I scattered them among the nations, yet in far countries they shall remember me, and with their children they shall live and return." So, just like we said last time, how do we know that these verses are talking about Jesus? Jesus makes it a little bit easy for us in John chapter 10 when he literally comes out and says, "I am the good shepherd." And then he describes what that looks like, and it's very similar to the language that we just read. But other authors in the New Testament saw it as well. Hebrews chapter 13, 1 Peter chapter 2, these guys all portray Jesus as the shepherd and us as the shepherd's flock, the sheep. And so if that's true that these verses are talking about Jesus, what does that tell us about him? Verse 16 in Zechariah 9 points out that God intended for he himself to be our shepherd and to come down and to save and to guide and protect us because we were, sheep that needed a shepherd, and we were valuable to him. We're described as being jewels. That's pretty awesome. Chapter 10, verses 2 and 3 point out that you and I, because we're sheep, We really have struggles, anxiety, fears, worries. I mean, we have all this stuff because we were made to follow a shepherd, but we follow all kinds of bad shepherds and things that we really shouldn't be letting run our lives. And then lastly, in verses 8 and 9, you see the picture of God as the shepherd trying to gather the entire world to himself as his flock. And God's not saying, I want you in my flock so that you can, go wander all the way over to the fence and be like, okay, I'm going to be over here if you need me, God. No, God's gathering us because he says, look, you're my sheep. I want you to live life with me. And these verses paint us the picture of this, that Jesus, as our shepherd, guides us and protects us as God intended. And that's an amazing thing for us, guys, because if that is true, you and I are a lot like sheep. We're smart. Some of you might be smarter than I am. We're imaginative. We're funny. We like to form bonds with one another, hang out with one another. Sheep do all of that. But sheep also get afraid pretty easily when something bigger than them rises against them. And when sheep get afraid, some of them take off and run. Some of them look at the other sheep like, do you know what to do? No? Okay. Do you know what to do? No? And we all just are like, what's going on? What do we do? And there's going to be times in your lives, guys, where you're just reminded you're a sheep. You might have an injury that keeps you from playing a sport or doing an activity that you thought you might be able to do later on in life, or maybe be your life, but now you can't. You might not get into the school of your dreams, or you get in the program that you wanted to is just not what you expected it to be. You might make decisions that lose some friends along the way, or who knows, maybe the whole world gets shut down because of an entire virus. I don't know. Sometimes things that are just bigger than us come up and remind us, well, we're just sheep. But that's really okay, guys, because if we're reminded that we're sheep, we're also reminded that there's a shepherd. And the picture of the shepherd we get is one who knows you and who loves you. And even from the beginning, before you and I were even born, has been saying, I want you to live life with me. That's what I made you for. And so in this season right now, I think it's very important for us to look at it just like Zechariah's people. As we're looking to build new normals, new routines, moving forwards, school might be out for a little bit. As we establish new patterns, we got to be thinking about, okay, there has been a work that's never going to be interrupted, and that is the work of restoration. And if we are God's sheep, then we need to focus our lives living for the shepherd. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next time on Out of the Oven. So the Luthers wanted me to point out today that their taste buds have some international variety to it as well, right? That was today? Okay, good. And so today, they would like for me to share with you Abuelita's hot chocolate, or Tablillas auténticas de chocolate mexicano. Because who doesn't trust their grandmother's recipe?